One of the most impressive filmmaking accomplishments of the 21st century remains Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. He crafted three splendid films that succeeded in taking us to Middle-earth to see this journey to destroy a powerful ring. Jackson's work has been rightfully praised, along with his co-writers Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Stephen Sinclair, composer Howard Shore, and an incredible cast who played those hobbits, wizards, and elves. And today, I'm going to count down some other notable people who worked on the trilogy and are buried within the long credits that end each movie, and who you may have seen elsewhere. They deserve to be recognized for their role too, although thousands of talented artists helped bring The Lord of the Rings to the screen, so this is really just a fraction. Starting with Ethan Van der Rijn. The supervising sound editor on the trilogy, he was responsible for creating so many of the iconic sound effects, from the swords clashing to the animals and creatures who flew in the sky or popped out of the ground. With the gigantic battles throughout the films, it was important to find the right booming sounds for those moments. Although one surprising fact is that only The Two Towers received an Oscar nomination for Best Sound Effects Editing. Although Van der Rijn, along with his fellow sound editor, the late Mike Hopkins, did manage to win that category. I'm not sure why the Academy's Sound Branch only recognized this film for its sound editing, but I credit the Battle at Helm's Deep for helping it break through. A few years later, Van der Rijn and Hopkins would win Oscars in that category again for Peter Jackson's King Kong remake. Looking at his other credits, Ethan Van der Rijn hosted the sound design and sound editing on several DreamWorks animation movies, most notably the Kung Fu Panda series, the Legendary Monsterverse, and the Sonic the Hedgehog movies. He has worked a lot with Michael Bay too. Meanwhile, he received his other Oscar nominations for Transformers 1 and 3, Argo, A Quiet Place, and The Creator. He's certainly built up an impressive resume, and if his name is in the credits, chances are you just heard a lot of nifty sound effects. Brad Vincent. The Lord of the Rings trilogy created a lot of jobs in New Zealand and helped jumpstart a number of film careers there. Someone who's made a name for himself as a production designer who received his first credits on those movies is Brad Vincent. He was hired as a sculptor on The Lord of the Rings, which means he had to create a lot of props and parts of locations you see in Middle-earth. Considering how many castles and fortresses had to be built throughout all three movies, he created so much work from scratch and using the guidelines given to him by the production design team. Years later, he was promoted to set decorator on the Hobbit trilogy, receiving an Oscar nomination for the first film, An Unexpected Journey. He also began collaborating with Taika Waititi, serving as production designer on several of his movies and earning his second Academy Award nomination for Jojo Rabbit. He recently created entire alien planets in Predator Badlands and is the production designer on the upcoming sequel, Spaceballs 2. I'm often impressed with what he's done on film sets, and it's amazing seeing his rise since The Lord of the Rings. Eric Synindon, a principal component of what made the film so special, was the work done by the visual effects company Weta. Whether doing practical effects or the latest in cutting-edge CG graphics, they are a marvel in that department. And someone whose name has been not only that trilogy, but other high-profile productions through his work at Weta is Eric Synindon. He was credited as a creature supervisor on the first two movies, and then as a 3D sequence supervisor on The Return of the King. He would then serve in supervisory roles on more hit movies at Weta, including on King Kong and Avatar. He was one of the principal visual effects supervisors on the Hobbit trilogy, receiving Oscar nominations for the first two films. He would also fulfill that role on films like Alita Battle Angel and The Green Knight, and then continue to work on the Avatar movies, winning Oscars for The Way of Water and Fire and Ash. I'm sure he'll be called up to handle the visual effects for the next trip to Pandora, but as you can see, he's truly one of those wizards who can help bring so many fantastic creatures to life. Bert Klein. The other people I'll mention on this list worked on the entire trilogy, but with such a massive undertaking, there are also those who only had a hand in one of them. And an artist I wanted to spotlight who did that was Bert Klein, who was an animator on The Return of the King, primarily on the battle sequences and other bits here and there. He was basically one of the last people hired at Weta just as the third film was deep into post-production, but his work is no less important. The reason I bring Klein up is he's had quite the impressive resume, particularly for his animation at Disney. He started at Disney as an in-betweener in the 90s and then became a full-on animator, working with the likes of Eric Goldberg and Bruce Smith to help draw characters like Phil and Hercules and Pacha in The Emperor's New Groove. After leaving Disney, he not only worked on Return of the King, but was a lead animator on Looney Tunes Back in Action and The Simpsons movie. Klein has co-directed a few animated shorts too, with Boys Night Out and Pups of Liberty getting Annie Award nominations. After returning to Disney, he has animated almost all the animated features since The Princess and the Frog, along with the occasional short. So it's neat that between the Disney productions, Bert Klein can say he also had a small hand in the tail end of this iconic film trilogy. John Howe. There are two people I'm going to mention on this list who had involvement with the world of Tolkien before they were hired to work on Jackson's trilogy, and one of them is John Howe. He'd become well known for his illustrations on Tolkien book covers, which caught the attention of the production team who invited him to provide concept art for the trilogy. In In addition to being credited as a conceptual designer, Howe was even a carpenter on the films. He would continue to work with Weta on other projects, including as a carpenter on the New York scenes in King Kong, a concept illustrator on the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and a conceptual designer on Mortal Engines. He's often returned to Middle-earth, providing concepts for the Hobbit trilogy, the Amazon series, The Rings of Power, and the animated film The War of the Rohirrim. He definitely played a key role in developing the look that many audiences will continue to associate with Middle-earth, but he's not the only one. Alan Lee. Like John Howe, Lee was also brought on based on illustrations he'd done on Tolkien stories, with Peter Jackson, the production team, knowing he could bring the right designs to the world of Middle-earth, including the weapons and various castles. For example, his design for Saruman's two towers were copied exactly into what you see in the movies. In addition to serving as a conceptual designer, Lee was also credited as a set decorator on the two towers and The Return of the King, winning an Oscar for the latter. He would work with Jackson again, providing concept designs for King Kong, The Lovely Bones, and the Hobbit trilogy. His influence on fantasy cinema predates even The Lord of the Rings, though, as he previously provided designs for Terry Jones' Eric the Viking, and was involved in the early development of Ridley Scott's Legend. It's amazing that both Alan Lee and John Howe were able to bring their imagination to both Tolkien's books and these large-scale adaptations. Caroline Cunningham. With how humongous these productions were, Peter Jackson needed a skilled first assistant director, and Cunningham absolutely filled that role on the trilogy. Before heading off to New Zealand to help make Lord of the Rings, she was already an accomplished assistant director and production manager on several Australian films, including working with renowned directors like Peter Weir and Scott Hicks, and she was previously Jackson's assistant director on Heavenly Creatures. She would continue to collaborate with him as an assistant director and producer on his post-Lord of the Rings features, and additionally received producing credits on The Adventures of Tintin and District 9, the latter of which earned her an Oscar nomination for Best Picture. She most recently served as an assistant director on Mortal Engines, but I've had trouble finding out what else she has done recently. In any case, assistant directors are also important to making sure these massive projects go smoothly, so she really does deserve recognition for what she accomplished on that trilogy. Bob Anderson. If a production needed someone to coach the actors on the right sword fighting techniques, this legendary fencer was the man to get. Credited as sword master on The Lord of the Rings, when you see Aragorn or Elwyn swinging their swords so they deal with orcs and goblins, you can thank Anderson for how they pulled off their moves. His film career goes back to the 50s, when he worked on a few Errol Flynn swashbucklers, and then helped teach proper sword fighting technique on productions like Barry Lyndon, The Princess Bride, the Parent Trap remake, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, and the Zorro movies. And when you see Darth Vader battle Luke Skywalker during the lightsaber duels in the original Star Wars trilogy, Bob Anderson was in the costume for many of those scenes. He passed away in 2012 at the age of 89, leaving behind an impressive list of credits and unforgettable sword-fighting scenes. Christian Rivers. This is someone whose work with Peter Jackson goes way back, when they first worked together on his horror comedy Braindead, on which Rivers provided storyboards and the creature and gore effects. He then did storyboards on Heavenly Creatures and was a conceptual illustrator and animator on The Frighteners. Rivers would wear multiple hats on The Lord of the Rings. He was credited as a visual effects art director on Fellowship of the Ring, pre-visualization supervisor on The Two Towers, and visual effects conceptual designer on Return of the King. He then became one of the principal visual effects supervisors on King Kong, playing an important role in bringing that giant gorilla to the screen and winning an Oscar for his and his team's efforts. Jackson saw a lot of potential in Rivers and asked him to direct the remake of the World War II classic The Dam Busters, which he was producing. However, despite Stephen Fry writing a screenplay and Weta making several models, the film has struggled to get made. Rivers would eventually make his feature directing debut with Mortal Engines, but the negative critical response and box office performance means it will be a long time before he gets the opportunity again. Since then, he's worked primarily at Weta, contributing visual effects to various big movies. So while his directing career may end up falling short, his VFX expertise absolutely deserves praise. And the number one name you may recognize in the Lord of the Rings credits is Joe Letteri. One of the biggest names working in visual effects today, he's a leading expert in pioneering breakthrough techniques in CG effects and motion capture technology, and has played a key role in so many awe-inspiring images. He has won 6 Oscars for Best Visual Effects, including 2 on the Lord of the Rings trilogy and 3 on the Avatar movies, along with a Technical Achievement Academy Award for the groundbreaking implementation of practical methods for rendering skin and other translucent materials using subsurface scattering techniques. He started out in Industrial Light and Magic's computer graphics department, contributing to movies like Jurassic Park and Casper. When he moved to Weta to work on The Lord of the Rings, he helped come up with so many techniques to bring Jackson's vision to life, most notably the innovative motion capture used on Gollum. It was that character that inspired James Cameron to begin serious work on Avatar, and he knew he had to get Joe Letteri and his team at Weta in order to bring the Na'vi from his imagination to the screen. Among his other notable credits are The Adventures of Tintin, the recent Planet of the Apes movies, and several entries in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Of course, these massive effects undertakings are a group effort, and Letteri is one major piece of the puzzle. Looking at these names I mentioned, it really gives a further understanding of how many people and departments it takes to make a movie, let alone 3. See you next time.